What if a nation was born in celebration and in tragedy at the very same moment? What if independence came with burning cities, endless refugee caravans and trains filled not with passengers but with silence? And what happens when the man who created that nation dies only 13 months later? Welcome back to History. We journey into one of the most dramatic chapters of modern history, the birth of Pakistan, a story of empire collapsing, political awakening, impossible decisions, mass migration, and a young state fighting to survive before it could even stand. This is not just a story of 1947. It begins much earlier, from the fall of Mughal power to the crushing aftermath of 1857 to the reform movement of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, to the rise of the Muslim League, to Allama Iqbal's vision of a separate homeland, and to the determined leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who transformed an idea into a nation. Then came Partition. The British departed, borders were drawn in haste, millions crossed into uncertainty, communities that had lived side by side for generations were torn apart in weeks of violence, and fear was finally free. But freedom came at an unimaginable cost, and before the wounds could heal, the new nation would lose its founder, face political chaos, constitutional crisis, and witness the rise of military rule. Is Episode 1, Birth of Pakistan, Partition, Blood, and Survival. Dim the lights and step with us into the past. For centuries, the Mughal Empire had ruled vast lands across the Indian subcontinent. Its cities glittered with mosques, forts, gardens, and centers of learning. But by the 19th century, that empire was no longer a great power. Internal decline, regional rebellions, and the growing influence of the British East India Company had reduced Mughal authority to little more than a symbol in Delhi. The emperor still sat on a throne, but real power had already changed. Hence then came the Great Uprising of 1857. Soldiers, princes, peasants, and citizens rose against British rule in a violent rebellion that shook the subcontinent. For a brief moment, many believed foreign domination could be reversed, but the revolt was crushed with brutal force. Cities where devastated leaders were executed, and the old order was shattered forever for Indian Muslims. The aftermath was especially severe because many British officials associated the rebellion with former Mughal elites. Suspicion fell heavily upon Muslim communities. After 1857, the British Crown took direct control of India. New colonial state emerged, efficient, powerful, and deeply unequal. Railways, telegraphs, and modern administration expanded across the land, but political power remained in imperial hands. Muslims, once associated with old ruling classes in many regions, now faced decline in education, administration, and economic influence. Many feared they were falling behind in a rapidly changing world. Out of this crisis emerged Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. He believed survival would not come through nostalgia, but through knowledge. He urged Muslims to embrace modern education, science, and political awareness. In 1875, he founded the Muhammadan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, which later became Aligarh Muslim University. His message was clear: a community that did not adapt would be left behind. He also warned that India's different religious communities had distinct political concerns that could not simply be ignored. As constitutional politics expanded under British rule, Muslim leaders sought their own representation. In 1906, a delegation of Muslim notables met the viceroy in Simla, asking for safeguards and separate political voice. That same year, the All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka. It began not as a revolutionary force, but as a political platform to defend Muslim interests within British India. Few could yet imagine that this organization would one day create a new country. Early 20th century brought change at a rapid pace. New elections, new institutions, and rising mass politics transformed India at the same time. Hindu and Muslim political organizations often disagreed over representation, language, and power sharing. Many Muslims feared that in a future democratic India, numbers alone would determine power, and as a minority in the subcontinent they could be permanently marginalized. The question grew sharper with each passing year: how could Muslims secure their future? In 1930, philosopher, poet Allama Muhammad Iqbal offered a bold answer in his famous Allahabad address. He proposed that Muslim-majority regions in northwestern India should be united into a self-governing political entity. It was not yet the final blueprint of Pakistan, but it was a turning point. Iqbal gave political form to an idea that had long been growing beneath the surface. Muslims were not merely a religious minority, but a distinct political community. The center of the next chapter stood Muhammad Ali Jinnah, once known for seeking Hindu-Muslim unity. Jinnah gradually concluded that constitutional guarantees inside a united India would not be enough. Precise, disciplined, and relentless, he transformed the Muslim League into a mass political movement. Under his leadership, the demand for Muslim self-determination gained momentum across cities, villages, universities, and press circles. To support us, he became Quaidioism. The great leader then came March 1940 in Lahore before a vast gathering. The Muslim League adopted what became known as the Lahore Resolution. It called for independent states in the Muslim-majority zones of northwestern and eastern India. The wording was debated, the future map was uncertain, but the message was unmistakable. The old political framework had changed. Demand for Pakistan had entered history. What began as decline after empire had become a movement for nationhood. From the ruins of 1857 to the platform of Lahore in 1940, a new political identity had taken shape. The dream was now alive, but dreams in history are rarely won without sacrifice. By the mid-1940s, the British Empire in India was nearing its end. The Second World War had drained Britain's strength, and the demand for independence could no longer be contained. Across the subcontinent, the question was no longer whether the British would leave, but what would remain after they were gone. Two powerful visions now stood in direct opposition. The Indian National Congress sought a united independent India. The All India Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali, argued that Muslims were a distinct political nation and required a separate homeland. Years of negotiation, constitutional proposals, and failed compromises had brought both sides to a final deadlock. Communal tensions were rising. Trust between communities was breaking down in many cities. Political rivalry spilled into the streets. Riots in Calcutta, Punjab, and elsewhere revealed how fragile the situation had become. What had once been a constitutional debate was now turning into a crisis of survival. In 1947, Britain sent Lord Louis Mountbatten to oversee the transfer of power. Time was short. Pressure was immense, and the empire wanted a rapid exit. The result was the Mountbatten Plan. British India would be divided into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The decision changed the fate of millions. Pakistan would consist of two wings, separated by more than 1,000 miles of Indian territory. West Pakistan and East Pakistan. It was an unusual state, born across distance, language, and geography, but united by the political idea that had brought it into existence. Then came one of the most hurried and consequential boundary decisions in modern history. A British lawyer, Cyril Radcliffe, who'd never before visited India, was tasked with drawing borders through Punjab and Bengal. In a matter of weeks, maps were redrawn. Districts divided, villages separated, canals split, and railway lines broken. Entire communities waited in uncertainty, not knowing on which side of the border they would walk on. 14 August 1947. Pakistan was born in Karachi. Celebrations filled the streets as the new nation came into existence. Flags were raised, speeches were delivered, and hope spread through a people who believed history had turned in their favor. Muhammad Ali Jinnah became the first governor-general. 2 millions. This was not only independence, it was the fulfillment of a dream once thought impossible. But beyond the ceremonies, the subcontinent was descending into catastrophe. Partition triggered one of the largest mass migrations in human history. Muslims moved toward Pakistan. Hindus and Sikhs moved toward India. Families packed what they could carry and left homes their ancestors had lived in for generations. Roads filled with columns of refugees stretching to the horizon. Carts, animals, children, and the elderly moved under the burning sun with no certainty of safety ahead. Then the killings began across Punjab and other regions. Communal violence erupted on a horrifying scale. Villages were attacked, neighborhoods burned, trains arrived at stations carrying only the dead. Women were abducted, families vanished, and centuries of shared life were torn apart in weeks of vengeance. And fear no victory speech could silence the screams of Partition. The new government of Pakistan now faced a near impossible task. It had to build a state while receiving millions of traumatized refugees. Karachi, Lahore, and other cities swelled overnight. Camps emerged wherever space could be found. Schools open, fields abandoned, buildings and roadsides became temporary shelters. Food was scarce, offices were understaffed, resources were thin. Yet the machinery of a country had to begin functioning immediately. Even As Pakistan struggled to stand, another conflict erupted in the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, whose future had not yet been settled. War broke out in late 1947. Tribal fighters, local uprisings, and then the armies of India and Pakistan became involved in the First Indo-Pak. War battles were fought in mountains, valleys, and remote frontiers. By 1948, a United Nations-backed ceasefire drew a line of control, but not a final peace. Kashmir would remain unresolved, and its shadow would stretch across decades. Pakistan had achieved independence, but freedom had come at an immense human cost. The nation was born not in calm transition, but in migration, violence, and war. Yet amid the ashes, millions still believed they were building something worth every sacrifice. The map had been redrawn. Now the real struggle would begin: how to keep the new nation alive. Pakistan was barely a year old when it faced a loss from which it would never fully recover. The man who had led the movement, negotiated its creation, and given millions a political future was now gravely ill. Years of relentless work had hidden the seriousness of his condition from the public, but the strain of nation-building had taken its toll. On 11 September 1948, Muhammad Ali Jinnah died in Karachi. He was only 71 years old. Pakistan had existed for just 13 months. For many citizens, the death of Jinnah felt like the ground shifting beneath their feet. He was more than a statesman. He was the central authority in a country still trying to define itself. Institutions were fragile. Borders were unsettled. Refugees were still rebuilding their lives, and the constitutional future remained uncertain. Without him, the young state entered a dangerous vacuum. Jinnah's final years had already shown the scale of the crisis. Pakistan had inherited fewer administrative resources than India, a weak industrial base, severe financial pressure, and an urgent refugee emergency. Offices lacked trained staff. Ministries were still being organized. Records, equipment, and personnel had to be assembled almost from nothing. Yet, despite these burdens, many believed Jinnah's discipline and legitimacy could hold the nation together. Now that stabilizing force was gone. Past to Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, one of Jinnah's closest associates and a key architect of the new state. Liaquat faced an impossible inheritance: to govern a country born in trauma while building its institutions from the ground up. In the early years, Pakistan sought direction through ideology and law. What kind of state would it become? How would Islam relate to governance? How would power be shared between provinces? And how could two wings, East Pakistan and West Pakistan, remain united despite distance, language, and unequal political influence? These were not abstract debates. They would determine whether Pakistan became stable or fractured. In 1949, the government passed the Objectives Resolution, a foundational statement that attempted to reconcile democratic governance with Islamic principles. It declared that sovereignty belonged to Allah, while authority would be exercised by the people through their chosen representatives. To supporters, it offered moral direction. To critics, it left crucial questions unresolved. But it marked an early attempt to define the soul of the state. Meanwhile, deeper tensions were growing beneath the surface. Pakistan held the largest share of the population, yet political and bureaucratic power remained concentrated in the Western wing. Language soon became a flashpoint. When Urdu was promoted as the national language, many Bengalis felt their identity was being sidelined. Protests erupted, especially among students. The language issue became an early warning that national unity could not be sustained by symbolism alone. At the same time, governance in Karachi struggled to maintain continuity. Cabinets changed, rivalries deepened, and unelected institutions grew stronger. Civil servants and military officers, praised for efficiency and order, increasingly gained influence as politicians appeared divided and ineffective. Came another national shock on 16 October 1951 during a public gathering in Rawalpindi. Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated. The first Prime Minister of Pakistan collapsed before a crowd, and the country lost yet another founding figure. His death intensified uncertainty. If Jinnah had been the symbol of creation, Liaquat had been the bridge to continuity. Now that bridge too had fallen, the years that followed were marked by unstable governments, frequent leadership changes, and delayed constitution-making. Prime ministers came and went. General dismissed elected leaders. Political legitimacy weakened with every crisis. The public watched as the promise of independence gave way to factional struggle. Yet one milestone was finally achieved. In 1956, Pakistan adopted its first constitution and formally became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. On paper, it was a parliamentary democracy. It promised representation institutions, and a constitutional framework for the future, but by then years of instability had already eroded civilian authority. Military organized discipline and increasingly confidence stood in the background as politics faltered 2 years later. In October 1958, President Mirza abrogated the constitution and declared martial law, appointing General Ayub Khan as chief martial law administrator. Within weeks, Ayub removed Mirza himself and took full control. Pakistan's first democratic experiment had a nation created through political struggle was now under military rule. In just 11 years, Pakistan had survived partition, refugee crisis, war, the death of its founder, the assassination of its first prime minister, a constitutional breakdown, and a coup. Dream of 1947 was still alive, but it had entered a harsher age. Pakistan was born through sacrifice, shaped by migration, tested by war, and shaken by the loss of its greatest leader. Just 11 years, the new nation survived partition, refugee crisis, the death of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the assassination of Liaquat Ali Khan, constitutional turmoil, and the first military coup. But this was only the beginning, because in the next chapter of Pakistan's history, the stakes grow even higher. War with India, the fall of East Pakistan, the birth of Bangladesh, and the wounded nation, determined to rise again through nuclear power. How did Pakistan lose half its country? Did it answer defeat with the atomic bomb? And how did these events reshape South Asia? Forever you will find out in Episode 2, Wars, Separation, and Nuclear Power. If you enjoyed this documentary, thank you for watching. Subscribe to History Ledger if you have not yet, and join us for more.com cinematic journeys through real history. Until next time, the past never truly sleeps.